Hello and welcome to the TID Water and Power Podcast. I'm your host, Constance Anderson, and on this month's episode, we're discussing TID's Lineworkers. When you think of TID, your first thought may be a bucket truck driving down the road or a lineman climbing a pole to restore power. But even with that visual, you might not really understand what our linemen do. Day or night, rain or shine, soaring heat or freezing temperatures, TID line workers put in the work to maintain and improve our system and respond when outages happen to ensure TID can provide reliable electric service. On this episode, I'm joined by TID Line Supervisor, Duarte Xavier, to discuss the various roles within the line department and how our line workers respond when the power goes out. Duarte, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Why don't you start, if you would, by telling us a little bit about your background?
So I started at TID back in 1999 as a temp, as a shop mechanic. And then from then, somewhere around the middle of 2000, I got that job full-time as a fleet equipment technician. And I was in there for probably a good year and a half when I applied for the apprenticeship of lineman, line worker, and I got that. And that was a 3.5-year apprenticeship. Upon completion of that 3.5 years, within like a month, I became the lead lineman on the crew, which is the person that assists the line supervisor in the crews and the work. And then within 2 weeks after that, I was running the crew in the absence of a line supervisor. And from then, I just moved up, and I did a little bit of troubleshooting for like 8 months. They were short manpower, and I applied for the job. I tried that. It was a good job, but I decided then to go back to being on the crew. And eventually, hopefully, become a line supervisor. And I believe sometime in 2012, I became a line supervisor. And I've been that ever since. And it's been a good career. Excellent.
It sounds like once you made your way over to the line department and completed your apprenticeship, you really took off in that role, that it was a good fit for you.
It was. I enjoyed every bit of it. The apprenticeship was very knowledgeable. I didn't know much about high voltage. I had a little bit of guidance. There was a troubleshooter back then. He's retired since, to kind of talk to me about it. And I kind of informed him of, I knew a little bit about house voltage, but high voltage, I knew nothing. And he just kind of just shrugged his shoulders because, hey, we can teach you the high voltage. But it's a good career. He told me that then. And he was accurate. It was a good career.
It's proven out for you.
Yeah,
oh, good. Good. Well, we love to use the podcast to talk about some of the lesser-known positions at TID and some of the different projects that are going on that our customers might not be familiar with. Contrary to that, I think most of our customers are probably familiar with a lineman, quote unquote, and what they do and the bucket trucks that roam around town. But I don't think they necessarily understand the experience and what our linemen do on outages or what they do when there aren't outages. And so we're happy to have you here to kind of help explain, educate, and maybe bust some myths along the way of what our linemen do. So let's start by taking a look at the structure of the line department. How many members are there of the line department?
I believe there's like 23 linemen currently. There is 4 line supervisors and 1 temp supervisor. And then we have currently 8 first step apprentices. I believe they're going on to their second step. And then we have 1 that I believe is going to be 5th or 6th, probably 5th step.
Okay. And that's varying levels of the apprenticeship.
Of where they're at in their apprenticeship.
And I'm going to ask you a little bit more about what that apprenticeship looks like a little bit later on in our chat. So what does the actual organization then look like? You mentioned 23 line workers, but what's kind of the hierarchy? There's a department manager.
Yeah, so we have Ben, which is a department manager, and then we have 3 division managers, which would be Janine, which her duties is she oversees the troubleshooters and then assists in the everyday functions of TID and the dispatching office. And there's 2 young ladies in there that answer phone calls during work hours.
Okay.
She's over them. And then Annalish would be the one that's directly over the line department, the foreman, and all the linemen and apprentices. And he's the one that I would answer to. Okay. Schedules our work. And then there's Dan. He oversees the trees, makes sure everybody keeps clearances, does the transmission, and also assists in the absence of Annalish or Janine.
Okay.
All 3 of them kind of cross-train and kind of fill in for each other. It's pretty much the layout of the management part.
Very good. So you mentioned the 3 divisions. Let's talk a little bit more about that, the role of each division and what sort of responsibilities they handle. So the first one you mentioned was the service division and the troubleshooters, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they'll answer like all the phone calls between 7 and 3:30. Anybody that calls in for anything, they schedule appointments. People that want to do panel change-outs, they know all the troubleshooters' schedules.
So they do a lot then with the monitoring and the scheduling of the troubleshooters' day-to-day work.
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yeah. So if they have any issues or something comes up or they have any questions about a particular customer or what's going on with this, she assists in trying to,
get that resolved.
Yeah, what's involved, and if she don't have the answer, she can get it for the most part.
Okay, very good. How, just out of curiosity, how is a troubleshooter like assigned to a job? So they get a call, something's going south somewhere, and we need to send a troubleshooter out. How do they determine which troubleshooter, if there are 2 or 3 available, gets assigned to that?
So, the troubleshooters have assigned areas, and they have a map. And with that being said, they're assigned to that area, and if a call comes in, they'll know their schedule. Mm-hmm. And so they'll know he can take it. But if he's tied up, they'll call one in the adjacent area, per se.
Got it.
That's got an easier workload. They don't necessarily schedule everybody on something that they can't break away from. Mm. Okay. And so like during storm or anything like that, they're a little bit more cautious of what they schedule and don't schedule. Like an unforeseen outage comes up.
Sure.
They're usually aware of who they can send, what they're involved in, or who's even there for that day. They might. And so that's how they do the troubleshooting dispatching.
Okay, very good. And then how about the line division? The line division is responsible for the capital work that has to get done throughout the year to maintain the system. Is that accurate?
There's always capital jobs every year and to maintain our system, and that's important. And so some capital jobs require, right now, they just about take all the crews. Just because of manpower, and you're doing a reconductor that's a mile long, or 2 miles long, or whatever the case may be, and that's got to be done in sections. But on those kind of days, there'll always be a crew that who's ever in charge of that job, he's aware of that he might lose a crew, depending if an outage comes up.
Sure.
It's not like you can say, well, he's going to have to wait till 3:00. If we have, heat like we have right now, or storm, we basically won't do capital jobs like that.
That
we
makes
book it
sense.
around what in the past has been a good time, a good weather, and it's just logically.
That makes sense. Because I think that's an important thing to note is that you guys are assigned to do different jobs during the day, whether it's capital work or it's customer work or whatnot, and we'll get into each of those a little bit more. But if an emergency call comes in, an outage comes in, like you have to be able to leave that job in a good place or be able to tie it up. You can't leave wires all over the road and poles half erected to be able to go handle the unplanned outage. So there's a lot of flexibility that has to take place there and being very agile, I guess, to be able to move from one thing to the next.
There is. You have to leave everything safe, and you can't leave it half done.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a time issue there too. You know, you can't prep for something. Let's say for an outage for 2-3 days. You get halfway into that outage and just drive away.
Right.
So it has to make sense when you leave. But if you're going through and replacing poles, let's say for a capital job, and changing the arms, getting ready for bigger conductor, and you got 2 crews out there doing this, most of those supervisors are pretty good about saying, hey, this is a capital job. I got this much time. I'm at a point where everything's safe. Everything's tied in. I didn't get what I intended to get done today, but he can wrap it up and go do that emergency work. And that happens a lot during capital jobs.
Okay. And then the third division you mentioned is the transmission division. What can you tell us about that group? So
that would be Dan area. He patrols all the transmission lines, make sure there's clearances between all of them, looks through anything he might see that's been compromised, whether it's a broken bell on a transmission line, whatever. And obviously he writes up where we can go fix it. Sometimes you can have 1 or 2 broken bells and be okay, but you do have to take care of it.
Yeah, sure.
And so he also does the tree patrolling.
Oh, okay.
And, trees, they grow. And they go right into the primary. Everybody thinks it's a good idea to plant them into the primary. I don't know why. Or to hide the pole. I don't know. Okay. And so he does that. And he also does a lot of work with the underground boring contractors.
Okay.
They install the conduit to replace the direct buried primary wire that years ago they thought was a good idea not to put it in pipe. And today's time they realize it's not such a good idea.
So that's probably, I'm going to stop you for a second because that's probably an important note to mention is that a lot of people probably don't think about where their power lines are unless there's an issue. There might be neighborhoods where we have overhead lines. There might be neighborhoods where we have underground lines. And like you just said, nowadays, I think it's fair to say that most of the time when we put in underground, they're in some sort of conduit or pipe or something to protect those lines. But there are sections in our territory that are, like you said, direct buried, which means they're literally just in the ground. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And there is places where we have overhead with underground.
Oh, okay.
So just because you see them overhead doesn't mean, we're good.
Oh, okay. Good point.
There's no underground here because they're all overhead. That's
not
false.
Necessarily the case.
Yeah, I would say probably half the district's got both.
Okay.
Because there was overhead first. You need the overhead to feed the underground.
Got it.
And your poles are in front of your front yard, but you also might have high voltage lines in your front yard also. Okay.
And that's where our locators come in, right?
And that's where our locators step in.
Okay. And what do they do exactly?
The locators. So anytime you dig, you need to get a USA. And every utility has to mark their utility, including us. And they go out and they've been trained and they have equipment that they can attach to our conductors and mark their path.
Okay.
And there's on that website, USA Dig, that tells you, how you have to expose that before you go dig. So you can't just take a backhoe and start digging.
Right.
You're going to get in trouble.
For everyone's safety.
Yeah. And most of the time there's a joint trench. So there'll be foam, then gas, then electric below everybody. So you're going to hit 2 or 3 things before you get, but not always. But as a rule of thumb, it's a joint trench.
Okay. So important to know, 811, call before you dig. Okay. So I'm going to give you a scenario. Let's just say it's an average day in the TID service territory, and I'm going to go home for lunch, and my power goes out. What should I do as a customer, and what is automatically happening at TID when this outage takes place?
So, like, if you're a single homeowner or a business, first thing you should probably go do is go check your breaker, and if you call the service division, they'll ask you that, did you go check your main breaker? And if you do that and it's on, you still have no power, then I would call the service division.
Okay.
And then inform them that they'll go through a set of questions for you. On TID side, they're starting a new program where I believe they can see that meters are offline. So they can see that yours is offline, or they can see that the whole section's offline.
Okay.
And with that being said, once they see that, then they'll know immediately start getting a troubleshooter heading that direction.
Okay. And I think that's an important note, because it used to be that the primary way we found out there was an outage was from customers calling in and letting us know. But I remember in the last board meeting, Joe Gill, our AGM of electrical engineering operations, reported out that the system was actually identifying the outages prior to the customers calling in. So I think that's kind of a move towards automation of some sort that will benefit the district and our customers in identifying outages.
Yeah, I believe so. It's going to assist the district for sure. If you have a 12 homes on a transformer, let's say, and they're all sleeping, nobody knows their power's out. Sure. And now they get an alert.
The power control center gets the alert. Yeah, and they know.
Hey, and I believe they dispatch somebody going that way is their intent.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I've recognized that there's an outage at my house. It's during the day, so I call in, I talk to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher sends out a troubleshooter to investigate. Okay. And so then what is the troubleshooter? He's going to assess the situation when he gets there, but what sort of things is he looking for?
So like an individual home, and depending if it's underground or overhead, you're out in the country or in town. So if we go with the underground first thing he's going to do is go to your panel, make sure everything's all right. Pull the meter is best place to go. Pull the meter out, look at all that, or pull the panel below the meter, and they'll take voltage and verify, it is legit. They're lost voltage. And then from there, they have maps and stuff in their trucks. He'll be able to keep jumping back to the source. He might also look at the house adjacent to it and see, hey, they got good power, so it means the transformer's good if it's fed from the same thing. But then he would go, because every underground subdivision, before it gets to the customer's house, might go through 1, 2, 3, 4 splice boxes. Okay. And so you got to figure out where that conductor is bad. Is it, and that helps out the line department.
So if it's just my house, that's one thing. Right. If it's 20 houses in my neighborhood, that's something different.
It could be 3. So it could be everyone, that box is being fed where it branches out to 3 houses. The wire that's feeding that box is bad. That way affecting 3 homes. Yeah. Or it could be from that, where that box is, where the 3 houses branch off, it could just be your house. Sure. The TID still takes care of that. Yeah. But now overhead is a little bit different because it's all visual. Okay. So let's say he gets out there, he kind of do the same thing. Look at the fuses in the transformer. They're still in. Okay. If they're still in, then he'll go verify voltage at the customer's house. And if he's got faulty voltage, it could be the transformer or it could be the service wire that's going to the house. And if it's run through a bunch of trees and stuff like that, it's a good chance that the wire failed, being rubbed in trees. Yeah. And if the fuses are blown, 99% of the time, they'll just make everything safe by taking the other fuse out and call to have that transformer replaced. And they also have the ability to kind of test that transformer and verify that it is a faulty transformer, and they would dispatch a crew for that. Okay. So if the troubleshooter comes out and determines that this is more widespread than just my house, maybe it involves, the majority of the houses in my neighborhood, is there a way that they can, let's say there are 100 of us out of power or 100 services out of power. Is there a way that they can kind of minimize the number of people that are out of power and still address the issue? So whether it's overhead or underground changes. So like if it's overhead, and there's line fuses that went out, and then he comes up on a transformer or something that he can isolate, could have caused that to go out.
Mm-hmm.
And he can see something visual or a car pole that, let's say, hit a pole, blew the fuses, but now the wire's floating, which nothing's tied to it. It's just up in the air. He'll clean that up, make it safe, and go fuse the line back in. As long as he can do it safely, because as a line crew, we can go out and install the new pole and do what we've got to do with the wires energized. It takes a little bit longer, but the district really doesn't like leaving people out of power for 3 hours.
Right.
Now, when it's underground, they're limited because they don't have the equipment necessarily with them, and it would be impractical to figure out where that problem caused the underground.
Okay.
If it's like on a secondary or something that they can know for sure, that caused it, and there's a two-way feed in there, then they would definitely go and isolate it.
Okay.
Which means they'll take the wire that goes between those two transformers they hit, take it off the transformers, and go plug in somewhere else where it was, we call it parked.
Okay.
And get everybody back in power and just leave that section out.
Got it. Okay.
And at that point in time, nobody really would be out of power, and then they call a line crew to come out, expose, which it would have been exposed. But
yeah.
Because if they go plug something in just on a whim, it could be pretty risky.
Yeah, absolutely.
A transformer could explode.
So the troubleshooter's going to go out to the scene. He's going to assess everything. He's going to do some investigation to kind of determine what the cause is, where the cause is, some of the details. If they determine that this is bigger than what one troubleshooter can handle, then they're going to report back to headquarters and get a crew to come out.
Yeah, so if it's during business hours, they would contact the service division that they're going to need a line crew. The troubleshooters out there trying to, it's got a large outage, whatever the case may be, and the troubleshooter will submit a tag with just about all the information on it that he's aware of. And then that will assist us in, by the time we get to the yard, what do we need?
Okay.
Like I said, the dig in, that's pretty cut and dry. So we don't need our locating equipment or the fault finding equipment to find where the fault's at. We obviously know where it's at.
Okay.
It was hit. Or do we need to bring it because we're not sure where it's at? And like last night's call, the transformer failed, but all the other transformers were online, and the high voltage wires were still energized going through that transformer.
Okay.
So we knew we had a secondary problem, or a transformer just got old, and this one happened to just be old and overheated. It was had some dirt in it, and the grates on top of those transformers, people cover them.
Okay.
Whether it's with dirt or lawn or whatever, and that's a bad thing. It needs air, especially in the summer when it's hot.
With the heat we've been having.
It needs to get rid of that heat, and when people cover it, it just wears them out.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So the crew comes back to the yard. They leave whatever they're doing at the time in a safe manner, come back to the yard, gather what they need for this current outage, and then head out to address it. So what happens if the same situation takes place at 8:00 at night? The crews have already worked their full day. They've gone home for the evening. How do things work after business hours? So
after business hours is a little bit different for the simple fact that those calls now, you're not obviously engaged in any kind of work, so you don't have to worry about how you're leaving the job site that you're on. And the troubleshooting part still plays the same role. The line crew, whether it needs sometimes a typical line crew for an underground outage, it would be a supervisor, 3 linemen, and 1 apprentice.
Okay.
And the reason for that is we can separate in an underground track that's out of power. You almost have to be able to separate to go to different locations because you need one to always be reading the equipment And then you go to different locations and break that connection to see if the high voltage, if there's a fault between there and where I lifted it. And if that fault goes away, then you have to put that back and split it again.
Okay.
So sometimes there could be up to 30 transformers.
Wow. You're just trying to narrow down.
Time.
Yeah, absolutely.
That takes time. And then once you narrow it down, then you could see, hey, is it conductor or is it a transformer? Mm-hmm. And if it's conductor, we can get everybody back on pretty quick because of the majority of our district now, and they've been doing this for a while, has a loop feed where it starts at one point, comes all the way back. And therefore, if there's a fault between two transformers, we can feed it for both direction. And then the wire is what failed. And in some cases, we don't have to fix it that night.
Okay.
If it could be fed, management's told us, you guys are...
And get everybody back in power.
Get everybody back in power. And if you can do a timely repair, do it while you're there and put everything back to normal because we have a busy workday too.
Sure.
So when it's a radial, now you have a little bit of problem. You do have to find it and fix it because there's no other way to feed it. Or if it's a transformer, now you have an outage.
Yeah.
And so we try to switch, if it's a loop, we try to keep all the transformers energized all the way to the one we have to replace. So instead of having, let's say, 100 people out of power, we got down to, let's say, 12 homes.
Okay.
And then obviously we have to replace that transformer.
Yeah. So I'm gonna back up a quick step and say, so after business hours, if this same situation happens and a customer calls in, who are they talking to at that point?
So after hours, it goes directly to the control room. And I believe they have somebody always at like the front desk that takes care of the distribution throughout the whole district. There's others in there monitoring everything. And all calls go to them.
Yeah.
They know already.
Yeah.
And so the control room's always aware of who the troubleshooter is on call for that night. And then they would send them that way.
Okay. So then in the middle of the night or after hours anyway, if they determine a crew needs to get called out, how does that call out process happen?
So once a troubleshooter gets on site and sees that, hey, I'm going to need a crew. So then he would inform them and what size crew. For the most part. And then it's an automated system that just reaches out to it's a rolling list, stays in the same sequence. And all crews require at least one supervisor and 2 journeymen. That's a bare minimum.
Okay.
So it goes simultaneously between the foreman as it's going through the lineman, as it's going through the apprentices.
Okay. So each different level is getting called out at the same time on a rotating schedule.
Second.
Okay. Got it.
They all start at the same time, but like one supervisor obviously is going to be easier to call than, let's say, get 4 linemen.
Yeah.
And that's not abnormal. It's not abnormal to have 5 or 6. If you have a busy pole or 2 poles and it's got heavy wire on it, as a line crew, we usually wait for most of everybody to get there and go on what we need. But before we leave the yard, we verify that we got everything that he said, hey, you got to bring this, this, and this.
Yeah, based on the information available to you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think an interesting difference, though, during the day, you as a line supervisor, you have a steady crew that you work with. But if there's an emergency that happens at night, an outage that happens at night, and it goes through this rolling system of calling folks out, you're going to end up with a mishmash of folks from different crews. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's where, Ben, Annelish, and the whole management team there, we switch crews like yearly, pretty much. Okay. I get a whole new crew. Okay. And it does a lot of cross-training. So there's guys that are better than others are underground, and guys that are better at overhead, and guys that don't work together very often. And after hours, you could get 2 or 3 guys that's not really their strong suit on underground very much, and then you end up on an underground outage.
Yeah.
So they do their best to get everybody kind of cross-trained and working with each other, because you got to work as a group.
Absolutely.
You can't, it's not very productive, if you don't work. You got to work together.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it can get downright dangerous if you aren't all on the same page.
It can be. We're pretty fortunate, I believe, for the most part. Most of us, everybody work-wise, does what needs to get done.
Yeah.
Who do you got? What's the job? And what's everybody's strong suit?
Sure.
And then you kind of delegate from that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. How would you say being a line worker has changed over the years?
So a line worker in today's time, I think they're more aware of the jobs I believe we're doing every day. Like my lead lineman on my crew usually is the one that kind of dictates how they want to go about doing the job. And that's part, I think, of the lead lineman's job, because a lead lineman usually is somebody that wants to advance to becoming a line supervisor. It's kind of like pre-training.
Okay.
And then we have a different mapping system than when I first started. And most of the linemen are familiar with our mapping system, how it works, what you're looking for. Back in the day, it was paper.
Okay.
Hardback.
Yeah.
Wasn't always up to date.
Sure.
It was a good 2 foot long by 18-inch tall, 4-inch thick binder with metal ends, and you went through it. Then we had maps in the foreman's room that sat on this cradle that were 3 feet by 2 feet, and we went through it all like that. Okay. As to today, we have it all on a computer.
Yeah.
Just about all of them know how to go to it. As far as the call-out system, so when I first started, it was a control room. So they were monitoring all of TID, electrical system, and all of a sudden they said they need a crew, and it was somebody in there would call me up.
Pick up the phone, huh?
Would be the one to call you. Hey, Duarte, got a call, tag, can you work?
And if you can't, or if you don't answer,
right,
then
he moves to the next one,
to the next
like
guy.
A rotation system.
Okay, but it was all done manually instead of automated.
I'm sure they had speed dial for all the foremen, and he did one at a time now.
Sure.
So remember how the automation.
That's right. It's calling out all the different levels at the same time.
So he had to go get one supervisor, then go down and get linemen, then go, we had apprentices, go get apprentices. We used to call them traffic control back then.
Okay.
And so then they went to hire an outside agency. I remember it is usually a couple of young ladies, so they had 2 of them calling.
Okay.
And they would call you in the middle of the night,
Okay.
Hey, all happy and cheerful. And then at some point in time, the district decided to try that, which is an automated call system now.
Okay.
And so it gives you the option then at that time to either accept it by pushing a digit, or I really don't want it, but if you can't get nobody, there's a different digit push for that. So it would call you back.
Okay.
So, and it's a rotating list. It keeps track of it.
Okay. So back to me and my outage. I'm home on my lunch break. I'm trying to microwave my leftovers, and I have no power. I've called TID. I let them know I'm out of power, and the dispatcher that I speak with confirms that, yes, there is currently an outage in my area, and that a troubleshooter has been assigned to come and check it out. Describe for me what that troubleshooter is going to do when they arrive on scene.
Yeah, so first thing...
And let me interrupt again real quick. Troubleshoot, that's just one person coming out by themselves, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So that troubleshooter first has to go verify, or should go verify, that you actually have a problem with the lines coming in from TID. So if it's after the meter, if it's after the wires that come in that heat up the meter, that's the home.
Okay, then I'm calling an electrician.
You'll call an electrician, but more than likely the troubleshooter will go kill that section of wire coming to your panel, depending on where he sees a problem. And most of the troubleshooters, I think, are very helpful with customers. We always used to. We'll try to kind of take a cover off and say, hey, you got a main breaker that failed here, so you'll have to get an electrician. it's kind of the obvious. And that would be how he would do an individual home.
Okay. So they're the troubleshooters are typically the first to the scene. Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they have the same training as anyone else on a crew or anyone else in the department. Yes. Or is there specialized training?
No, there is specialized training somewhat. So on a crew, all the troubleshooters have been journeymen.
Okay.
Not necessarily lead linemen.
Sure.
And ran a crew, but have been qualified journeymen. And so they've all been trained as far as doing line work. But troubleshooting sometimes takes just a little bit different of approach to things. So like on a crew, you got 3, 4, 5 guys. And so everybody's watching themselves. So a troubleshooter doesn't have that available to them. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that like in a dangerous point. I mean that in that he's got to check off these boxes. He needs to verify there's an outage. And they all have their own thought process as they're going to a job site. And I did when I troubleshoot, and is it overhead or underground? Mm-hmm. Where's the line fuses? Mm-hmm. And then you just keep rolling. You have an outage, you see line fuses are out.
And so if it's not something obvious like a car pole, then they just have to do a lot of different assessment and investigation to try and figure out what went wrong where.
Yeah. So like last night's troubleshooter, he gets called out. There's customers off of one transformer, just one, that has no power per se, right?
Okay.
All of those have no power. So first thing he goes to the transformer because he knows that's what's feeding it. And he opens it up and he sees it's got dirt in it. The lid's covered. And so he knows right there, well, I need a line crew. So transformers have a couple different ones have different things in them.
So bottom line, every situation is going to be different. Every time a troubleshooter gets sent out, they have to kind of go through this assessment process, make sure first and foremost that the scene is safe. Sometimes that involves working with emergency responders on a scene to make sure that the scene is safe for like the fire department, for example, to do what they need to do. Yeah.
Most of the time, when I troubleshoot, you get on there, CHPs there, just about in fire department, paramedics. If they see high voltage lines down, they stay clear. They're waiting for that troubleshooter to say, hey, it's safe. And that troubleshooter has to, be on his top step right there and say, hey, you're good to go. Stay off the wires.
Yeah.
They'll always tell you. And then, the ones that's hard for them, I think sometimes would be where there's a car stuck on a pole and the pole's not completely broke, but you're afraid to move it. And it'll come down. So now they need a line crew there to support the pole while the tow truck moves the car off the pole.
Yeah, sure.
And and if it's challenging for them sometimes because if all that line's still energized, which it very well could be, so there's really no outage. Now they're going to have to go create an outage to get this car off the pole safely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so these are all decisions they got to make on their own.
How long does it typically take a troubleshooter to get on scene once they get the call?
There is no set time. So weather dependent, outage dependent, and locations.
Yeah, because our service territory is 662 square miles, so there's a lot of ground to cover there.
There's river to river, mountain to mountain.
That's it.
Yeah, so they wouldn't necessarily have somebody go to, clear up the Hickman, the far skirts of Hickman, and then get a call in Del Porto and say, hey, they would more than likely call somebody else in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the specific issues that a troubleshooter might just resolve themselves?
There's actually quite a few of them, I think. So like an overhead service wire that failed for the most part, they'd splice it out. Blown fuses, obviously, they would be able to do. Anything they can fix themselves that they carry on their truck, they would they do.
They just take care of it. So let's say there are no unplanned outages, no emergencies going on. What other sorts of things are the troubleshooters doing during the day, during a typical workday?
When there's nothing really coming in, they patrol their areas and look for stuff that might be compromised that they need fixed.
Okay. And kind of doing maintenance checks?
Yeah, they patrol their areas. And, there's times I know when I troubleshoot, I had South Modesto, and those car lots, they all had balloons. There'd be a lot of times that I would see balloons, and during those times I'd remove them. They'd be one Mylar balloon between a bunch of other balloons, just flopping back and forth, waiting for that Mylar to cause an outage. So I would do a lot of that. They wouldn't go change out arms per se. That's too much work for a single guy, and you just can't do it with a line energized legally. They have some freedom. If it's an emergency, they can do a little bit more than if it's scheduled. It changes the grand scheme of things, so to speak.
Okay.
And most of the troubleshooters do that. And the more they do, the easier their job is, as far as writing things up. Hey, you need to do this. We need this done. And then there's a different levels of priorities. I think we go like a 1 through 4. So a priority 1 per se is fixed immediately.
Okay.
So carpool.
Okay.
Priority 1. Underground subsurface people outages, unplanned. Those are priority ones.
Those are priorities.
Priority 2 within 5 business days. Okay. So a broken ring, but a customer can't get in it. Kids can't get in it. Okay. That'd be, priority 2.
So that means that there's not a current outage. There's just a repair that needs to be made.
There's a repair that needs to be fixed because it compromises TID's property, so to speak.
Okay.
And then there's 3, I think it's 30 days.
Okay.
And then it's at their discretion what they sense is a priority.
Okay.
And then 4, whenever you get around to it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. You can't do everything all at once.
No, and you can't let some things go for a week.
Sure.
So it's both ways.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we go back to our hypothetical lunchtime outage, I'm at home, I'm out of power, but I'm checking to see what's going on with the outage at tid.org/outages. Because now with this new platform that you mentioned earlier that's helping TID on the back end kind of identify where these outages are happening, it also has a component for our customers on the front side, where folks can go to our website and they can see roughly the number of accounts that are out of power or how widespread the outage is. They can get information on the cause and the status, has a crew been dispatched or is it under investigation? And then we can also see there the expected time of resolution or when we hope to have folks back in power. So I'm paying attention to that as a customer who is currently out of power, and the line crew has been dispatched and they're coming out on the scene. So during business hours, when a crew is called out to respond to an emergency, what happens? They're already out working on a job somewhere. What do they have to do to be able to leave that job and then come to assess the unplanned outage?
We have the material. I'd say, 30-40%. If, let's say, it's a broken crossarm, we carry that on our trucks. We carry one of just about every size of crossarm that would be vulnerable towards us replacing. I usually will take one of the bucket trucks and myself and head to the job site and start the work. So when the crew gets there, we're ready to start the work. While the rest of the crew goes through the yard, picks up the material we need and the poles, let's say, poles, however many.
Sure.
And then meet us there.
Okay. What happens after hours when the crews aren't at work? We've gone through the process of kind of doing that automatic calling on rotation.
As far as running a crew, everybody gets called in. A supervisor, 2 or 3 linemen, 4 linemen, a couple of apprentices. We go over the equipment needed, who's taking what, and then we go over just the basics, and then kind of like, hey, this is how we're going to do it.
Now, I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier when you said, when a crew needs to get called out, it'll be one line supervisor and one foreman and this many linemen and whatnot. Tell me a little bit more about the crew structure. Why are there different crew sizes and how does that make a difference?
So, it depends on the work. So like the troubleshooters know, like, oh, they're going to need at least 4 linemen. On the call I was in last, there was only one transformer that was offline, but all the other ones were on. Well, he knows, and when he opened the vault, okay, they don't have to look for where the problem is. It's this transformer. Mm-hmm. So that you would need at least 3 linemen and 1 apprentice, and a foreman's given.
Okay.
So a job like that. But let's say it's an underground subdivision, and you got 15 transformers offline, and there's now you have to have a crew that can accommodate being separated to isolate this quicker, and or else you'd be out there, you'd be pulling your hair out, you'd be out there twice as long. I think the biggest crew I've been on, I've had like 12 linemen.
Oh wow!
And it was a switch in Patterson, and it was a major switch, underground switch, and it was a lot of work. It was like a 12-hour job.
Wow. Does TID ever use contract crews?
Yeah, they have. We used to, when I started, they only hired outside contract crews to build like long lines, like our transmission lines that went, I think, from out here, the 115 yard all the way to Hillmore down Lander. I think that was when I first started, they contracted that. So they would just hire them as needed. And then they were doing customer jobs for a while. So
we've talked a lot about, kind of what happens during these individual isolated outages. But what about a storm situation where you have, winds that are blowing branches into lines, there's damage to poles, and there are multiple outages happening at any one time, spread all across our service territory? How do you, and on top of that, you're likely working in the rain and the wind and the whatever to get all these outages fixed. How do you manage that when there are multiple outages like that? And how do you stay safe while you're trying to restore power?
Yeah, during large storms like that, whether it's heat or rain or wind, you just got to do one at a time, basically. It can be challenging because you're not talking about, let's say, a 9, 10, 12-hour day. Mm-hmm. It could be 20 plus hours, 30. It could be on.
Yeah.
We do good in today's time, I think, as far as go along in a nice, timely manner, be safe, and we just got to do one after the other.
So you just kind of focus on what's in front of you.
We do, and we'll go in, into the yard after 16, 17 hours, maybe get a bite to eat. Mm-hmm. Nobody really goes home. And so everybody pretty much stays until the last tag's done. The thing I see different today versus 20 years ago is, and today I think we do a little bit better job of watching out for each other. And management does, hey, you guys hungry? You bringing food? What?
Make sure you have water.
Yeah. They do a really good job of that from my perspective.
Good.
It's not like we were mistreated back in the day.
Sure.
It just wasn't the philosophy back then.
Okay.
As much as it is today.
That's fair. So speaking of inclement weather, what are some of the main causes of outages that we see in our area?
So a lot of time it could be a car poles, or pole lines on some of these places are just right outside our roadways, within 12 feet.
Sure, that makes sense. It's right there.
When I travel outside of our area, the pole line's 30, 40 feet from the roadways.
And then now sometimes our equipment will be good, but we'll see that equipment fail because people have overloaded certain equipment.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So transformers is one of the biggest, I think, things that get overloaded. Customers, for whatever reason, just add load. without letting the district know for one reason or another. And then what the transformer was sized for, it now it's asking to put out twice as much. And so it can do that for a little while. But then you get heat, especially. And if it's underground, no ventilation, grate's dirty, it's just going to fail. And the biggest thing I think the public, isn't very well educated on when you add load, or they're doing it mischievously, either way.
Okay.
Because there's always going to be fees involved when you got to upgrade something.
Sure.
For the most part.
But there's a limited capacity as to what that equipment can handle.
There is.
So you really need to reach out to the district on that.
That's right.
So we've talked about when there aren't outages that are currently happening, unplanned outages, or what we call emergency work, that crews will be working on different projects that are kind of pre-scheduled that we know are coming, may or may not involve planned outages, but they're projects that we're planning for in advance. Can you tell us a little bit about what each of these are? So we've got capital work, maintenance work, and customer work. Can you kind of break down each one of those for us? Yeah,
so customer work would be one where a customer's adding a service for whatever reason, putting in a well.
Okay.
He needs, 3 or 4 poles set to get to where the well is. He has a panel there. And so that would be a customer job, so to speak of. And then the capital jobs mainly determined, I think, by engineering and then analysts and the managers as far as not necessarily timing, but who's going to do them and how many crews is it going to take to get that accomplished.
Okay.
And that would be like an overhead job per se.
Okay. A restring or something like that.
Yeah, a reconductor. So the district needs a larger feeder going in a certain direction.
Increasing capacity.
Yeah. So they have to change the wire size. You change the wire size, you got to change the structure of the pole and the integrity of the pole, Or capital underground feeders. So we do a lot of underground. Patterson's a lot of underground.
Sure.
We have a lot of underground stuff in there. And we inherit a lot. And there's capital jobs with that.
And what about maintenance work? What is kind of involved in that?
So we do maintenance work is distributed by analysts. And it usually falls in between customer work.
Okay. Well, and I understand right now because, like so many other industries, we were experiencing these supply chain issues where we couldn't get some of the equipment that we needed. And so we have, developers that are coming to us that want to put in these subdivisions, but we don't necessarily have the equipment we need. Well, now we're getting that equipment in. Yeah. So I understand there's kind of a rush of customer work right now. Okay.
Yeah, there is a rush on that.
Okay. So when we have these situations where we have a lot of customer work, that becomes the priority because you guys try to get that done, within a week or two of you getting the job. And so then that's a situation where some of the maintenance work, if it's not urgent, kind of gets put on the back burner until you have a break in time.
I could see them going back to a maintenance crew on the full-time basis, rotating guys through there where they can have somebody appointed to 6 months. You're going to do this much maintenance in this area, and then we'll swap you around. I could see that happening. And by prioritizing customers, emergencies always tops everything. After that, it's customer work. And then it falls, and capital falls in there too with the customer. So it's kind of like a 50-50 split.
Okay.
Then after that, we currently then do maintenance. And right now, like during this weather, maintenance is easy for us to do.
Okay.
Because we can break away from that.
Okay.
Maintenance is easier to break away from.
Okay. So with each of these different kinds of work, whether it's capital, maintenance, customer work, those are all, like I said, planned in advance, scheduled in advance. And so we know that this job is going to require a 4-hour outage or an 8-hour outage to complete this work. How do you guys go about letting customers know in advance that there's going to be an outage in their area, this is how long it's going to last. How does that communication work?
So currently, here for the last, I think maybe a year, anyhow, it's been going on a little while. We have a job scheduler, and then she reaches out to the customer.
Okay.
And informs them. And this day, between the line crew will be there. They're going to have an outage, from 8 to noon, whatever have you.
Now, before the job scheduler was in place, you guys actually would, if it was like a outage that needed to happen in a subdivision or a neighborhood, you would go through and do door hangers.
We would. The line crew, the supervisor, we still do that. I remember riding with the old supervisors. We go out and look at the job, and if it's a subdivision, like we're pulling underground wire in, we're going to do 3 or 4 transformers. We would go hang the whole crew. He would just make out a bunch of them. And you take this street, you take that street. And we would just go through there and leave door hangers.
Yeah. Well, that's important. You have people that are trying to get ready for work, that have, families. And it's as much as we can give that advance notice. So we talked earlier about some of the more common causes of outages. But let's talk a little bit about some of the other challenges that the line department encounters. What are some of the things you guys see?
So a lot of times, rodents get into our overhead fuses that go to underground, whatever have you, cause outages. Whether it's a squirrel, raccoon, in winds and high winds, I've had to remove a little blow up kid's pool that was laying across all 4 phases of the primary, but didn't relay the feeders. And it's challenging to get it off without getting it together. So, in high winds and what have you not, stuff ends up on the primary. And then, obviously, the first rains of the year cause some outages for us. It's worse when we get a mild rain and then it dries up a little bit, because then all the dust from harvesting and stuff will track through the dirty insulators, cause pole fires.
Okay, because that current can then jump from
it'll
debris
track
to
through
debris.
Dirty insulators. That's a big thing. It usually just tracks and it keeps going down. It usually burns the top of the pole top off, and there you go. You got an outage. Probably in 20 plus years, I would say at least maybe 4 or 5 times in that time. If our first rain after like harvest is just a downpour.
Okay.
It seems like those pole fires go away.
Okay.
Because it's like it just cleans all the insulators and the arms, everything of dust and dirt. But it has to be a good downpour.
Yeah. Makes sense.
It's when you get that mist and that rain, and then it never really goes. And if you ever look at electricity tracking, you can see it in the wood like little dark veins just glowing, and just it wants to get to the earth. So it's just going to go down the arms, get to the pole. It's got metal hardware, heats that up, a little bit of a breeze. And it just, when everything just times just right, it'll just happen.
Let's talk for a second about wildfire mitigation. So that's something that we see every year, and it kind of seems like it gets a little bit worse every year. What are we aware of in our service territory, and what do we do to kind of mitigate against that? So
we have fire zones where, that's patrolled, and Dan oversees that. And so in fire zones, all the poles that go across dry areas, it's a 20-foot circle that has no weeds in it.
Okay.
For the most part. So they kind of
clear that area around the pole. And in addition to that, I know that TID puts together annually a wildfire mitigation plan, which is reviewed and then approved by our board. And that was just approved at our June 4th meeting, so not too long ago. And then within that, it has some of these, like you were talking about, the pole clearances. It talks about tree trimming. What are some of the rules around tree trimming where lines are concerned? Yeah, so that falls under Dan, as far as I say, and he does a really good job of
keeping those clearances. So around the pole, yeah, as you said, it's a 20-foot circle. All trees from distribution, they need to be 10 feet from the high voltage lines.
Okay.
So that's our high voltage, which is obviously the top circuit on that pole. And he patrols them regularly. We have crew trees on site every day.
Okay.
And they stay busy. Trees, like I said, people plant trees right under the primary or next to the pole, and that needs to be maintained.
Yeah. Well, that's an important point, though.
Yeah.
Whose responsibility is it to keep tree branches away from the line?
So the district currently, if it's a low service that goes to a house or a pump, and that's not as crucial, for trees to be in it.
Okay.
But if it gets damaged by a tree, the district, they're responsible for that.
The customer is responsible for that?
So if it damages the wire and whatever they need to wire, the district can bill them.
Okay.
Okay. And so, but the district also provides a service that most people don't utilize. They can, with an appointment, you have to work with the district, come out and remove that wire, and you can trim those trees from the wire going to your house for free.
Okay. So we'll create a safe environment for the customer to take care of that trimming. Okay. So you had mentioned earlier that you yourself went through the apprenticeship program, and that we currently have 8 apprentices that are sort of learning the lay of the land. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. So if one of our listeners out there is thinking, hey, line work sounds like a good gig, I'd like to know more about that. What's involved with becoming a line worker? Tell me more about this apprenticeship.
So to get a job, as an apprentice at TID, I believe you need a high school diploma or equivalent of. And I would think you need to get familiar with climbing a little bit. Just you can't go and apply for a job where you're going to have, 100, 200 people that already know how to climb and you've never climbed. And the other benefit to that is to make sure that you're okay with not afraid of heights.
Sure.
And how to move. And the other thing we really look hard at is people that are really sincere in wanting to work outside all the time and are good, have good mechanical skills as far as knowing the proper use of a hammer, screwdriver. It's nothing really challenging, but you have to, you're going to be using this stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. So if it's something you never really worked with, you should get familiar with that.
Okay.
I don't think it's difficult, and I personally think it's a good choice. The other thing you have to know about the apprenticeship is you have to know that it's not a 40-hour week, obviously. Okay. So don't consider it if you don't want to work weekends.
And that's not just during the apprenticeship. That's line work in general.
The whole career.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if you don't want to work weekends, holidays at night, don't do it. Okay. To me, but if you like being outdoors and you like being challenged, you want to learn new stuff. As far as electrical, we have a basic test you have to pass, but the district will teach you everything you need to know about high voltage. It's a 3.5-year apprenticeship, and you're going to have to, they're in 6-month intervals.
Okay.
And they'll guide you through it. It's not like you get a pop quiz in 6 months. They'll train you all the way to that test. So you'll know, how you're doing.
Yeah. And so you said 3.5 years, and it's 6-month intervals. So they're kind of at the end of each 6
steps,
months, then you're testing out of that step essentially.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. You have to advance to go
to stay in the program.
Yeah.
but still making sure anyone who graduates through the program has all the skills and all the knowledge necessary.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So as far as anybody that thinks you got to go to a line school, I think that's great.
Okay.
I'm not saying no. I never went. I can tell you about a dozen guys that work at the district that were in-house, currently work here, that have been successful.
Okay.
Done good.
Okay.
And to my knowledge, they have no regrets. I can also tell you of a good half dozen that tried it out and realized it wasn't for them. And that's good. So I think the district looks at people that live in their general area too, so because for hiring purposes, we hire whoever we think's a good fit, so to speak of.
Mm-hmm.
And people from our area, I think, is a good thing, but that doesn't mean somebody that's from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. They don't have a chance. They do.
And that's hiring, and that's hiring into the apprenticeship program.
Yes, of course.
And so where do we typically, the candidates for the apprenticeship program, where do those folks come from? Are they internal? Are they external?
So there's all. Okay. So there's some you could be from out of state. You went to a line school, you're working for a subcontractor somewhere, and you want to get on permanently somewhere. We have them from everywhere. We have we have a few in-house guys, and we have people that were locally from here that went to line school and were working for other contractors. And we have some people, such as myself, that just didn't know nothing about it until they started working here and thought, geez, this would be interesting. And here you go,
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because, obviously, I would think anyway, you have to come with, or at least be able to learn certain skills to be successful on the job. So even if you don't know all of what is entailed in being a line worker, there are probably some skills that you need to bring with you if you're going to be successful. What would you say some of those skills are?
I think just good ability to work with hand tools right off the bat. I think that's an important skill. I think being a good listener, paying attention to detail is good, because everything we do comes with somewhat of like a schematic, or you have to be able to read and comprehend when you're building something. And we walk you through it. We show you through it. It's nothing difficult. And you gotta have a genuine interest. If you don't have an interest, you're probably not going to be very successful at it.
Okay.
You got to. And you have to know that you have to work in a group. Mm-hmm. This is not a solo job where you get a pickup and you're driving around the country. You have to be able to work in a group and get along with people. You don't have to necessarily agree with them, but you have to be able to communicate well and get along and know how to respond when you're given tasks to do, as far as you need to get them done.
Sure.
I tell some people when they start here, it's not a daycare. So,
but going back to what you mentioned about, you have to be able to work in a group. Like there's a lot of trust that's involved. You depend on your crew, and your crew depends on you. And you have to have that level of trust in your fellow workers to know that everybody's doing their part properly.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of trust. And like every time, I think earlier I mentioned, we change crews and this and that. And I'm getting more and more familiar with most of the new faces. There for a while, I wasn't around them as much. But as a supervisor, my biggest challenge, it's not the work. It's the people. Everybody has to work together.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest task, is to get everybody on the same page, seeing everything the same, and doing what's asked of them to do, and follow instructions and get it done in a timely, safe manner. But yet be responsible enough that, hey, this ain't going to work, and bring it to somebody's attention, and not like, let's say, a bunch of puppet sort of. They're just going to run through, and if it works, it works. Just shrug your shoulders. Oh, well, you can't have that. And it's a dangerous job.
Sure.
Give it a try. If you'll know if you're scared of it.
I would think that would be pretty apparent pretty early on.
Yeah, height is the biggest thing. I think there are a lot of people out there that say, "Oh, I'm not afraid of heights," and then when they realize they're holding onto a pole at 20 feet,
and it's got some sway to it, and
to move.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what else would you, to kind of help us wrap things up here? What else would you say our listeners need to know about what it means to be a line worker at TID?
TID, as far if you're going to work in this area, work in the line department here is a great career. It is. If you like being outside, if you like hands-on work, and as much as, there's the weather, that's the wind, the rain, you're going to have to work through that. I'm not going to say it's always enjoyable, but it's a sense of accomplishment. When people are out of power, they depend on you to get it back on. You'll be challenged too. So this is not going to be one of those jobs, so to speak, that you just show up, you get paid. You're going to be, it's challenging. It's rewarding. I'd say for this area, it's probably one of the best jobs you can get. From my perspective, I definitely have no regrets.
I was going to say it seems to have worked out pretty well for you.
Yeah, I have no regrets. But it's, I guess I would just say that you're going to work for it, though.
Okay, I think that's fair.
It just because you want to do it doesn't mean that when you become a lineman that you're going to work hard for it.
Well, I know that during those very few times when I have been out of power, or I know that there's an outage happening in our area, and I'm thinking about it's 111 degrees outside, or I'm thinking, it's the middle of a storm or a downpour, that little bit of an inconvenience to me not having power for a short spell is nothing compared to what you guys are doing out in the elements, trying to make that right for all of TID's customers. And I am very glad that you guys are out there doing what you do. So
well, thank you.
Thank you. No, truly. Thank you guys. Thank you for tuning in to the TID Water and Power Podcast. You can find TID on Facebook at facebook.com/TurlockID, on Instagram and Twitter at TurlockID, and on LinkedIn as the Turlock Irrigation District. I'm your host, Constance Anderson. We'll see you again next time.